Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, which is the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. Many of us have been active feminists since the 1970s or even the 1960s, and we were not surprised when this new attack of transgender identity ideology came along. We have not changed our analysis, our basic radical feminist analysis, which was outlined in Janice Raymond's The Transsexual Empire in 1979. So you're in a good place here because we've thought about this problem and thought about iterations of patriarchal violence against women and domination of women for a very long time. And luckily, we have many of our sisters here. We have a declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has lays out our position. It's been signed by 39,474 people from 160 countries, 547 organizations. So if you want to, if you haven't read it, do have a read of it. It's a very clear analysis of the problems of gender identity ideology. To promote the declaration, we have country contacts, we have organizations. You can get in touch via this info@womensdeclaration.com or the website. Our program today is fantastic. We've got Elly Arrow from Germany, and she is going to, the title of her talk is Red Light Expose, Sex Industry Abolition Podcast. So you can see Elly here. She's going to speak first. Then we have Thistle from USA, and her talk and song and or singing is Women's Liberation Through Bikes, Songs and Campfires. So that's going to be fantastic. And then we are going to hear from Jasmine Sussex, middle of the night. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for being here. Women being called far right and Nazi in Australia. So our first speaker is Elly Arrow. Elly Arrow is a German activist against commercial sexual exploitation. She's been researching, writing, and creating social media on prostitution, porn, and the many intersecting issues for 8 years. She works part-time for the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women and has been a member of the Red Light Expose podcast since 2023. And Elly Arrow's talk today is Red Light Expose, Sex Industry Abolition Podcast. Thank you so much, Elly, for coming and sharing what you know and your insights today, and over to you.
As you know, any women's project that's grassroots and that doesn't toe either big conservative or big progressive party line is vastly underfunded. So that includes our podcast. This is our logo. We are Red Light Expose, and our mission is to both combat the idea of sex work as work. This is empowerment, economic development, and like careers for women, that harm denialism, as well as the still very powerful old story around the sinful woman corrupting society, and it's anything bad that comes out of the sex industry is just the fault of women making poor decisions. So we're not in either of those camps. And when I say we, I just want to introduce you to the other women on the team. So we strive to be international. We are present across 3 continents. We did make an effort to connect with our sisters in the global south. That has been more tricky due to time zones and due to language barriers and due to sometimes the lack of digitalization in some countries. So we originally had someone from South Africa with us, and then some of you working with South Africans, you might know there's a lot of rolling blackouts, and so she wasn't able to participate. So what we do is try and bring on those voices as guests. So when we do an episode, it's going to be one of us and a guest, or it's going to be 2 or 3 of us having a discussion. And even though we're from all these different backgrounds, and like I said, talking to women from even more countries at other times, we find how much we have in common. That's really it. And most of the team are survivors of the industry themselves: prostitution, porn, stripping, human trafficking, the many gray areas between all those things. But then myself and Savannah Severn, we grew up in porn cultures and we lived the ripple effects of that. So we don't come from an explicitly, survivor perspective, but we had the industry touch our lives in different ways. And and we, pay attention to the developments in our respective countries, what's happening to women inside and outside the trade, and we understand how fluid those boundaries are because I mean, I struggle to find a young woman where somebody hasn't tried to recruit her in some ways into the industry. So if we haven't been recruited, we've had to resist the recruitment in some way. And yeah, we talk about a huge range of issues. We tried to make this little graphic to just, yeah, visualize what it is. We talk about the links between all these things. You can see in the middle, we have the pillars of all of this. I guess one word that's not there, but probably should be, is men, because we have all this attention on the women who are in the public, the women on OnlyFans, the women in so-called sugaring, which we think is just another euphemism for prostitution. But we don't see who runs those websites, who runs the porn sites, who's behind the camera, who are the boyfriends and criminal gangs and organizations. In my case, Germany governments making money from all of this. So that's something we want to highlight and that we do in our episodes. And of course, we understand this can get really, really dark. And it has to be because we don't want to sugarcoat, but we do strive and have an episode now and then to talk about both on a personal level and a societal level, what has worked, what have women seen in terms of how they've managed to come from a place of being paralyzed and traumatized into being able to speak out, help others, organize, as well as how have women managed to achieve political change in their countries against huge amounts of pushback. And we realize there's a long, long, long history. Abolitionism starts with the first wave of feminism. It was never popular. Men have always hated it. I think it was Josephine Butler used to be like chased down the street or been tried to set fire to rooms where she was trying to speak publicly. I believe I've read it, it went as bad as that. So, I mean, we when we do in-person events, we sometimes need a security as well, especially for the survivors. That's a big issue over here in Germany. And but what doing the podcast enables us to do is each woman is, in the comfort of her home. We pay for the tax, so everyone has a semi-professional setup, and we can, from the comfort of our home, speak to each other about these things. And it's whatever a given member of the podcast feels like is an urgent issue to her, that's what we make those episodes about. And just to show you, here's some episodes that we've published. These are just 10 out of 24 that are available on every major podcast site for free. They go between an hour and a half. And we talk about things like the sex for rent issue that we don't call it prostitution. I mean, sex for rent is a wild term anyway. The mass predation of landlords on women struggling to pay their rent, struggling to find affordable housing, and how that bleeds into the commercial industry. Also, how it connects to these big name cases we hear about, the Andrew Tates and the Neil Gaimans. I don't know who's been following the Neil Gaiman case. He is now actually being accused in court of human trafficking. So, these connections can become quite overt with time, and it's worth observing. And we go from those cases and we try to explain how these men are not these isolated abusers, but they're actually very standard pimps and traffickers. And we come for a lot of topics that the progressives don't want us to talk about, like BDSM is one of our core issues. For instance, in the episode that you can see here, Call Me Master, one of our members, Victoria, talks about surviving the BDSM industry that makes a lot of money by hosting what are essentially abuse and rape parties. This really, there's no euphemistic way to say it. That's what's going on there. We talk about issues like religion as well. We will have some episodes on Christianity, but we started with the brilliant Yasmin Mohammed speaking about Islam and how, right, we have these conservative ideas laying the groundwork for commercial sexual exploitation, telling women it's empowerment, control over their bodies, when we think it's the opposite. We also have the conservative purity culture of cover yourself up, and if we can see skin, if you're out there dating, if you're doing this or that, you're a fallen woman, we can do things to you, how that creates exploitation as well. We try to go, like I said, for both of those narratives that in different ways make men exercise control over women. And here's another episode. Well, the next couple of episodes that we have coming up are specifically, so we are women only. I should say that our whole team is women only, but we do sometimes have male guests on, and we got a bit of funding from a male ally organization to do a series all with men who are doing activism in the space. We have men who do intervention with sex buyers, trying to stop them from purchasing by putting out fake phone numbers for escort services. And really, it's a man on the other end speaking to other men about why this is exploitation. We have male survivors speaking out because between 5 to 7% of commercially sexually exploited people are men and boys, and that's something we do want to highlight. We have a lot of men discussing masculinity, gender roles. I mean, gender is the eternal topic of what we're all dealing with here, and the idea that you become a man through putting others down. I mean, the sex and sexual abuse industry is, a very concentrated form of that. So we've had the chance to speak to a lot of men doing work in this area, and we'll be sharing those episodes. We have so much more we would like to do. Here you can see some episodes that, we have sketched out ideas. We have reached out to people. It does cost some money to produce these. Like I said, the technology costs money. When we have a survivor guest on, we want to pay them an honorarium because so many survivors of abuse are sharing their stories, and the activism is, it can risk impoverishing them when they're not treated as experts who are worth, paying for their time and expertise. So we strive to do that. And yeah, you can see a whole range of topics we want to cover, including the really difficult discussions like what about when a woman who is exploited starts exercising power over other women? I think that's a hugely delicate subject where we don't want to, the women who've been exploited by other women need to be acknowledged. And then we also need to acknowledge the nuance of sometimes women really don't know how to pull themselves out without tearing someone else down. And it's, you know, there's so much to talk about the parallels of prostitution and abusive relationships. We so often get asked if you're against prostitution, are you against marriage? No, but is there marriage that mirrors those dynamics? For sure. And those are not isolated cases either. So much to talk about here, as well as current events like obviously P. Diddy, Sean Combs, that's happening right now. We're also planning to do episodes on pop culture. So our hope is, yes, we want to speak to abolitionists, and we've gotten great feedback from abolitionists, from prostitution survivors who feel like the podcast reflects, their analysis, their emotions around this issue. But we're hoping to get some of the general public to listen to us, and that includes, people who are fans of computer games, films, TV shows, where this issue comes up all the time, but often in a romanticizing way, a harm denying way. And we want to dive into some of these like pop culture staples and go through them. And, maybe there'll be some listeners who are looking for, like I said, like a poor things analysis. And this is how we can get them into some more critical feminist perspectives. I should say, we have some support at this stage in some of these areas, but we're always looking if there's somebody out there who would be willing to volunteer an hour or two and they have expertise in these areas. We appreciate it. And what I have forgot to mention, which we all know is a big issue, one reason we can't get any money from big feminist organizations is because we're sex realists. And we want to talk about how autogynephilia shows up in commercial sexual exploitation. And that's a lot of people would not like us to talk about how they're autogynephiliac buyers of the industry, how it's sissy pornography, those issues means we can't get anything from the big feminist, most of the big feminist organizations. Their doors are just closed from the get-go. So that's why we rely on grassroots funding and word of mouth advertisement. Really, that's just letting people know we're out there on all the podcast sites is the biggest way that you can help if there's no time or money that you would consider sending our way. But if there is interest, we do have a website, which is redlightexpose.com slash, well, you don't have to go to the donate page. You can just have a look around. But if there's funds to spare, there is a donate page over there. And yeah, we're also looking into doing live streams, but then live stream technology costs money, Zoom costs money, StreamYard costs money, and we're always thinking where to put the funds, what's most important, and we've decided for now it's going to be the survivor honorariums. But we hope someday to be able to do more in terms of technology. But yeah, we're still in some fundraising stages, and it's a work in progress. I'm excited where it can go. But it's both been a joy connecting with women and we have a lot of behind the scenes chats, as I'm sure anyone who organizes the behind the scenes chats are what's most invigorating and nourishing. But of course, there are really stressful times, triggering times with this work as well. So it's a it's a roller coaster experience, and we appreciate all the support we can get. So thank you so much for giving us the time here.
So there's a question here from Vicky. Can Elly give a detail of what's going on in Germany with mega brothels, etc.?
Our government so prostitution is legal in Germany. That means you can open a brothel, but if you need to be in the brothel, you have to get a so-called license, a prostitute's license. So the government requires you to get registered, and they keep your data. They say they'll, keep it anonymous, but there's questions around that. And we've just had a government-funded taxpayer report that they were writing for 5 years get published that speaks very positively about this policy. It's 600 pages. I'm on page 200. It's a very upsetting report with a lot of awful myths around the industry, just repeated. While they keep saying, we don't actually know how many women are registered, how many are operating illegally. We don't actually know how many brothels are operating legally, because a black market actually continues. Just because you have legal brothels doesn't mean all the illegal ones close down. There's a variety of tactics that brothel owners use to stay active and fly under the radar. They'll pop up brothels in an apartment over here for a couple of weeks, and they close down, move somewhere else. There's still so much of that going on. There is among even just the registered women, twice as many Romanian women than German women. Like anyone who claims this is not about poverty, deprivation, I feel like that by itself disproves that. And but what we can't know, because this industry really wants to stay in the twilight, and I think it's impossible to drag it out of the twilight as much as German lawmakers try to do that, is we will never fully be able to prove how much is trafficking. We're still struggling to convince people that even if she doesn't have a trafficker, if the pimp is poverty or addiction or trauma, to get people to be compassionate about that. That's what we're really trying to do with the podcast, but it's very much of a work in progress here in Germany. And our government just said, even if you're like, oh, the report is driving me crazy. They're saying things like, even if you have a mild developmental disability, as long as you don't have a legal guardian, you can give informed consent. We've heard about informed consent to so-called sex changes. There's parallels here with the prostitution industry, with very young, impoverished, traumatized people are told you're making a decision and you're aware of the risks. And here is your prostitute license. Go to the legal brothel. It'll supposedly be safe, when survivors tell us that every kind of crime under the sun happens in legal brothels, as well as the still flourishing illegal system.
So we are now going to go to our next speaker and singer, who is Thistle Peterson. So hi Thistle, and you're still on mute at the moment, but thank you so much for coming. So Thistle is going to talk about bicycle villages, grassroots caravans. She is a radical feminist, been on Feminist Question Time a lot, activist, singer, creative, and also founded and has run Women's Liberation Radio News.
WLRN in 3, 2, 1.
I was born.
Hi, I'm Thistle Peterson, founding member of Women's Liberation Radio News. WLRN handcrafts and co-creates a podcast featuring woman-centered world news, thoughtful interviews, compelling commentary, and women's music, some of it written and performed by our members, like the WLRN theme music you hear beneath my voice. We are volunteers working together to break the sound barrier women are blocked by under the status quo rule of men. As radical feminists, we provide a place for women to hear and discuss the issues of the day in a relaxed and community-building atmosphere. Tune in every first Thursday of the month at WLRNmedia.com.
For my liberation, rise and rise again.
I'm going to sing
a song that is the theme music for WLRN at the end of the podcast. WLRN has been around for 9 years. We're going into our 10th right now. And it's a protest podcast. We are volunteers. We're learning and co-creating journalism as we go. It all came from interviewing Sheila Jeffries on 89.9 FM WORT in Madison, community radio station in Madison. It's like a community center. Lots of people go, hundreds are in there. And I went on the radio with Sheila and 2 others, and I interviewed her, and I created this song for the experience of going live with Sheila Jeffries on the radio because she was releasing her book called Gender Hurts. And there's a lot about, I'm going to say about the song afterwards, because songs create, sisters. And so be careful. And I'm talking to the oppressor at the end of the song. And we'll talk about that after I get there. But I play for the WLRN theme music that you hear again and again at the end of the show. I play the second verse, which is where in 2013, I went back to Mishfest because it still existed. And Michigan is like a homeland for lesbians, especially for women, all women in Michigan. And it was still happening, but it was captured in pink and blue goo. And I was around the campfire and I was realizing, how divided. And sure enough, Michigan was canceled in 2015 due to trans activism. And then he came a knocking literally at my front door. Anyway, let me play the song and we'll talk about it afterwards. Gender hurts, it's harmful to girls. Gender hurts, it's painful for the women of the world. The tyranny of male rule is worse than absurd. Gender hurts, it's harmful. So don't come knocking on my front door, saying I'm your oppressor and you are poor. No, don't come claiming she has your own, 'cause women exist separate from you. Leave us alone. Yes, gender hurts. It's harmful to girls. Gender hurts. It's painful for the women of the world. The tyranny of male rule is worse than absurd. Gender hurts. It's harmful. But how will we find our way out of this? What is the antidote for the patriarchal kiss? How will we find what needs to be shown? And then after that, where is home? Tell me, where is my home? 'Cause gender hurts, it's harmful to girls. Gender hurts, it's painful for the women of the world. The tyranny of male rule is worse than absurd. Gender hurts, it's harmful. And I know you don't really care about me. You are the master and it hurts you when I'm free. So now with your skirt and your lipstick exposed, there's nowhere to hide, and I am going home to Michigan. I'm going home to Michigan. To Michigan. got me. Michigan. So songs are like prayers, they're like rituals, they're like things that create and shape our social reality. And so at the end of the song, with your skirt and your lipstick exposed, I mean, the men came onto Mishfest land. They still come onto Mishfest land. It's our homeland because it was canceled in 2015 and the women just came back. And I was there 2013, 14, 15, and I watched it go down. And then in 16, it was like we were called and we all just went back and we camped, not a big group, Donna Avery will remember, but we were across the street at Camp Trans. And that's where it was a forest land. And so we camped there, but we walked the land. Women's ashes are there. It's our homeland. And now it's revitalized. And that brings me to how much bigger Michigan is and women's community than trans activism. And that we can overcome. And the bike ride and the bicycle is a really great tool and instrument of that. I wanted to talk about the bicycle and just how important it was to suffrage at the turn of the century. So I'll just talk about that for a second. And then I'll talk about what ecofeminists think about what our times are going, what kind of times we're going through right now. All right, so here we go. So back in the 1890s, the bicycle was being introduced and mass produced. It became very popular amongst uppity women, soy yo, y ustedes también, and a symbol of women's emancipation. It enabled women to move quickly through public spaces without male chaperones and to socialize with each other. Susan B. Anthony is in an 1896 interview with journalist Nellie Bly, stated that the bicycle had done more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. So it wasn't just seen as another form of transportation, it was seen as a tool of women's independence, agency, and self-reliance. Like, for example, women's clothing norms changed largely due to women being on bicycles. So the body is involved in this learning, in this social, cultural transformation that happened. The clothing changes were due to women on bicycles demanding to wear bloomers, eventually pants, and other suitable clothing that was more practical. And so it played a key role in the suffrage movement, and it can play a key role in our movement. And I wanted to talk about grassroots caravans. So for bike rides, I helped organize of big giant villages of people on bicycles, and it was intentional community, and we would write out, like, I made these zines with the vision. And I also wanted to talk about the difference between dreams and visions, and that this is a vision, and that means it can happen. And it's very real because we're in an eco crisis. We need to behave more like creatures interacting with each other in hive mind on the land. And that bicycle, that motion, I think helps us tap into that hive mind. And we literally become like a flock of birds or a school of fish or any number of other species you might notice in nature coming together in a tribe and how they help one another. And that motion of the bicycle, I know, really helps that ability. And I think when it's women only, that gynergy that Mary Daly talked about is happening between us. And anyway, so there's the drag gyne ride, and it was canceled because of the pandemic, but this very beautiful woman, Via, made the art for it, and Joe is going to post the Google Doc, and everybody has access to this zine for the dragon ride, but GYN. And because after Mishfest was canceled, I want to see what time it is. Okay, I'm good. After Mishfest was canceled in 2015, another festival sprung up called Michigan Family Reunion, called MFR, 142 miles away. So it was like an acorn, because Lisa Vogel, the founder of Mishfest, told us on the last, at the last Mishfest, each of you has an acorn from this experience, from these 40 years. Go plant your acorn. And so this woman took her acorn 142 miles. Dawn Smith took her acorn 142 miles, and she created a Mishfest look-alike type concert in the woods thing that all the women from Mishfest, not all of them, but I think at their first one, they probably had at least 500 women, the Mishfest refugees, basically, in 2016. And then she kept doing it 142 miles away. And so eventually my mind caught on, and I was like, oh, Dragon Ride. Let's ride our bikes in intentional community, learning and teaching from one another, a boot camp for radical feminists, to really put our theory into practice. And we're a body-based movement, right? And body realism is very real when you're out on the bicycle and you're feeling the wind and you're helping each other, because some ladies have more experience with bicycling than others. And so there's like a whole thing in the zine, you'll read about it, about how the structure of the village makes it so that you can go at your own pace. And there's just all this cool stuff. Anyway, so those are grassroots caravans. And then one of the last things I wanted to say is this paragraph. I'll just read. Many ecofeminists agree in 2025 that our life systems here on planet Earth are at risk of failing on a mass scale. Indeed, we seem to be fast approaching devastating climatic shifts and changes that could cause our species to go extinct. Since the Earth is changing and transforming so quickly, we need to as well. The bicycle, especially within an eco-village social structure based on mutual aid, cooperation, and group unity, and you'd be amazed at how fast people can grow into that ecstatic flow that brings with it not just joy, but ideas and creativity that's blocked in us, and that our species badly needs if we're to face reality and survive. The gynergy created in a bike village is palpable. Hive mind, everyone in sync, and entering into an organic space that vibrates with unity, purpose, and the joy of being in a group doing something positive, constructive, and real together. Remember, metamorphosis, the butterfly, it's real. Dragon Ride, the vision, 142. So I did actually end up biking the 142 miles between the two festivals twice. After 2020, there was the pandemic. So the zine that you're going to read, called the Dragon Ride zine that I was describing, that bike ride never fully happened. But in 2021, a group of 3 of us did it, because remember, people were still recovering from the pandemic. And so it was just 3 of us with one in a support. And then the following 22, but MFR is canceled this year. Thing within us as women that sometimes because we've been so abused and tossed around and everything, we lash out at each other. And I think these bike villages and the vision and the opportunity that structure, that social structure, that boot camp offers for group healing is kind of enormous. And so I'll leave you, and Aja, and I'm going to try to put my screen. I'm done. I believe our feminist movement needs more bikes, songs, and campfires. And then I'm going to leave you with this song called Turban Queen. And Aja Lyons, if you don't know her, she's a Black lesbian feminist here in the USA. She drew this guitar for me and sent it through snail mail, and I have it here for good luck. So about songwriting, this is for all of you. This song is for you, and there's no oppressor in this, and we can create that safe bubble like WDI and FQT is creating in their women-only spaces. Safer. I mean, those guys are relentless, right? My turban queen, when will you be seen with me out in the open breeze? My turban queen. are stickers to paste and campfires to make. And with the wind on your face, you'll pick up speed. My turban queen, come dance with me into the night under starry skies. We'll ride our bikes along the shore. Nishikami calls our names, and with honor I do the same. Oh, sacred Michigan, Michigan, oh, Michigan. My turban queen, let's dance cheek to cheek out in the open breeze. You are free.
We are going to now hear from Jasmine. So Jasmine Sussex is from Australia, and she is Australian, and she is up in the middle of the night incredibly kindly to talk to us. And thank you so much, Jasmine, for staying up and being with us today. And the title of Jasmine's talk is Women Being Called Far Right and Nazi in Australia. So thank you so much, Jasmine, and over to you.
I have been called some version of a Nazi for a good 2 decades. When I first started training as a breastfeeding counsellor, I used to be called a nipple Nazi because apparently breastfeeding counsellors, some of them, not me, could be a little bit intense about their kind of breastfeeding education and support. So I shouldn't really make light of it because obviously it's a terrible thing to describe anybody as a Nazi, but you know, since those days quite a lot has changed, and unfortunately calling feminists and TERFs Nazis or accusing them of being from the far right has, I think it's fair to say, kind of become a state-sanctioned pastime in my lovely country of Australia. So although it did happen before the Kelly J. Keane Melbourne 2023 Women Will Speak, Let Women Speak. I always get them confused now because we have our own description of these events in Australia, which is Women Will Speak. And then we obviously also hosted Kelly J out in Australia with the Let Women Speak event, which probably, it's fair to say, really kind of accelerated this description of TERFs and feminists as being Nazis or far right. So I have a little bit of a rundown of some of the key events that have pushed this description of us since that Let Women Speak event in March 2023. So almost immediately at that event, unfortunately, some attention-seeking men in black who were neo-Nazis did gate crash the event and stood on the steps of Parliament some space away from where the women were standing on the steps of Parliament. And the story ended up being that Nazis had joined our event and that we were somehow associated with the Nazis. So for those of you who don't know, there's a woman called Moira Deeming, who's a Conservative politician, Member of Parliament in Victoria, which is where Melbourne is down the south of Australia. And she almost immediately, having attended that event and helped Kelly to organise the event, was called in to explain to her leadership, John Pizzuto, and then the next day, the next working day, the 20th of March, it was announced that they intended to expel her from the party. So And in and amongst all of that, although Moira took the kind of first wave of the heat as the, Nazi associate, the premier, who's a Labor premier, he stood up in Parliament and talked about that hateful, nasty event, and flew the trans flag from Parliament House, and the number of members of the federal government, who's also a Labor government, particularly those who had strong Jewish electorates, spoke up against the hateful event, and what a disgrace it was that the Nazis had, allied with the women to perpetuate this hateful, transphobic kind of message. So it was all quite grim, I think, is perhaps the best way to describe what was happening. But then, I don't know if you remember, but the lovely Miss Al-Salem did kind of come to our rescue a little bit. And I know that some of the things that she said applied to other countries, but we did feel quite strongly that a lot of what she said in that particular statement, which was really kind of a warning to governments, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, or, the global North, I think they call it, which amusingly, Australia is part of the global North, despite being in the South. But anyway, she spoke about how governments really shouldn't be trying to shame women or vilify women into talking about our sex-based rights. And she talked about our right to protest and our right to talk about the intersection between gender and sex-based rights. We think she was talking about us. I'll just put it that way. And she did specifically mention Moira Deeming as well at the time, actually came on TV in Australia to talk about how Moira was being treated. So we're still recovering really from all of that, although we've had a number of positive developments since then. So at the end of that year, the Federal Parliament and the Legal Affairs Committee called for submissions on the rise of right-wing extremism in Australia, and a number of the submissions were about the Let Women Speak event and the hateful actions of, they'd always sort of talk about Nazis, but it was always at the Let Women Speak event, and Kelly J was always mentioned. So we all got slurred continually. And then early the following year, we had the Australian Human Rights Commission launch her own inquiry, because, she wouldn't want to be left behind, looking into threats to trans and gender diverse human rights. And at one of our feminist organisations, Australian Feminists for Women's Rights, FORWA, they've been in a, since then, ongoing escalating freedom of information process with the Australian Human Rights Commission to identify whose idea this inquiry was, what its scope was, if they were hearing from women, how it was identified that there were increasing threats to trans and gender diverse human rights, etc. And that's still going. So, thanks to them. So through this time, Moira Deeming, the Conservative, or, we call it the Liberal Party, but it's the conservative side of politics in Australia, was getting lawyered up with the best defamation lawyers in the country, which was excellent to see, and issuing a range of concerns notices against her former boss, who by then had expelled her and continued to defame her. So that all continued to happen. And then we had another very troubling incident, which Sheila, I think's here, was witness to. The Lesbian Action Group, which many of you may know about, have been in a ongoing legal process with our Australian Human Rights Commission because they were denied their human rights to run an event with lesbians who are lesbians. So to not include men who claim they're lesbians. And they were denied that exemption from the Sex Discrimination Act. And then they appealed to the AAT, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. And the Australian Human Rights Commission, in their wisdom, took evidence from a woman who's an advocate for the prostitution industry, or as she would say, the sex industry, who said that lesbians are akin to fascists. And the barrister for the Australian Human Rights Commission didn't have any problems with that. And yeah, so there's an ongoing process around that is still unfolding, but obviously it's extremely concerning that the federal government would put evidence like that before a senior member of that tribunal. Oh, forward. Okay, so jump to the next year. The defamation process is continuing. We had 3 weeks in federal court where a brilliant barrister defended not only Moira Deeming's reputation, but all the women who attended the Let Women Speak event. And oh, I just jumped to stage. Anyway, so sorry, no, I didn't. That was right. That happened. And then in April, we had a really important case in the family court where the judge, Justice Andrew Strum, rejected evidence given by a paediatrician from a children's hospital that transitions children in my home state in Victoria. And she said that people who don't want to give puberty blockers to children are akin to Nazism. And this was in her expert evidence to the family court case, which was looking at whether or not a little boy should be given puberty blockers when his father thought he shouldn't and his mother thought he should. And thankfully, Justice Andrew Strum was very, I'm trying to think quite the right word, very strongly rejected that evidence and also took, great offence at the outrageous kind of reduction of the horror of Nazism to apply it to a situation that it's just obscene, really, to apply it to. So that was really positive for us. And then we had the defamation judgment, which was in Moira Deeming's favour, and in May this year. And so the man who said that Moira Deeming was associated with people who were associated with Nazis had to pay her 300,000 Australian dollars in damages, and he also had to pay her legal costs and his legal costs. And her legal costs were $2.3 million. And I'm not quite sure we know what his legal costs were, but we assume similar because the two warring sides actually had the two top defamation lawyers in the country. So, so you would think that after such a salutary lesson that journalists and politicians would be very careful in throwing the N-word around in relation to women. And it has definitely helped, but surprisingly, we are still being called Nazis. And I was, with some other women, set up a new organisation called Women's Voices Australia in March this year to help to elevate opposition to some new vilification laws that are coming in my home state, which are going to be very, very, very grim. So, and also to organise some Women Will Speak events so we could talk about this topic, and also hopefully so that we could talk about issues that are important to us without being called Nazis. So I'll just catch up a little bit on some of the visuals of what I've just talked about. So this was at the beginning of the Let Women Speak event back in March 2023, where, almost straight away Moira said that she'll be fighting moves to kick her out of the party for attending the Melbourne rally where the Nazis were. And here you can see the beautiful Moira Deeming and your Kelly in the right-hand side. But it wasn't just Moira who had been defamed by this process. One of our local women who's done a power of work, Angela Jones, who was one of the co-organisers, who's, a single mum with 4 kids living in the suburbs, was also defamed very badly and called a Nazi associate, which is particularly ironic in her case because her great aunt, I think it was, is Jewish. So Yeah. Anyway, Ange did manage to get an apology out of Mr. Pseudo before Moira's defamation case was resolved, but she's still struggling with the aftermath and is still in some protracted legal processes around that. So it's certainly, yeah, there's the high profile women, and then there's the next level of women, and then there's all the kind of ordinary women, and all of them are damaged in different ways when we get called Nazis and far right. So this was, as I mentioned before, what Reem said about, we go back, about her concerns back in May. So she was talking about us being called Nazis, genocidaires. I'd never heard that word before. I love that word. Well, her using the word, and extremists, and her calling out specifically that they were used to intimidate and silence us. So I just kind of keep it a little bit light. Hopefully you can identify the difference between women talking about their sex-based rights and fascists. So the first photos are from our event that we organised in April, the Women Will Speak event. So here we have Michelle and Nina. Nina was singing the women's rights song that our Scottish sisters, I think they wrote it to the Old Lang Syne song. And Michelle is a well-known women's rights activist and feminist. I think she'd call herself a feminist as well, from my home state, who's organised a series of these events as well. So I wonder if they're fascists. What about these ones? Don't think so. It's kind of easy to pick the difference, I would say, but that's just me. So these were the men who gate crashed our event back in May, and they have a bit of a Nazi vibe about them, don't they? A little bit different. When we were planning our event, we did give instructions to women not to wear black, and if possible to wear suffragette colours. But even then, some of the police got a little bit confused when they were shepherding women through the police, cordon, and the women just had to point out to them that they were wearing suffragette colours and that they could go through. So that seemed to work quite well, which was good. In terms of this event, this new organisation that we set up, the Women's Voices Australia, to host these Women Will Speak events, I think some of the things that I've learned out of the process is that sometimes, if at first you don't succeed, perhaps rebrand. So as unfair as it is, there were some quite fixed views in Australia about our friends from England coming over and what it was that they represented. So we did really need to kind of take it into our own hands to be able to have a conversation about our politics and what we were trying to achieve and how that was relevant and different in the local context. So we did establish this new apolitical group, which drew on all the other groups, but, sort of had a different space, I guess, in that it was about organising these events and elevating women's voices. So Women's Action Group became Women's Voices Australia. And then I guess really what I brought to the process was the proactive media management and pre-event story placement. So, like when Kelly J came to town, it's like there's a lot of excitement and it kind of, the caravan rolls in and there's a lot of hype, but there aren't necessarily those kind of relationships with journalists that are based on, briefing packs and many weeks of understanding about what we're trying to achieve and coffees and all of these sorts of things, which when you're trying to tell a complicated, difficult story, you do really need to do those sorts of things. So this was probably the kind of exciting result. So this is The Age, which is our broadsheet paper in our hometown, and they reported on the kind of it was a real 180 in their description of our event. So, and we were able to work with the police as well to invoke special powers so that they could protect us, which was the first time they've ever used those powers, and meant that we could be heard, like Reem El Salem called for back in 2023, that it's not just enough for us to be safe when we're protesting, but we need to be heard. So the police pushed the trans activists back on the other side of the street. It's like our parliaments are like your Victorian parliaments, you know, they're massive limestone kind of buildings that, you know, go from one side of the block to the other. Anyway, so we were on one side and the trans activists were on the other side behind police barricades, behind horses. So we could actually hear each other, which was amazing and exciting. So just to kind of wrap up, because I realize I've spoken for longer than I thought I would. The reason I wanted to give this talk was I came to one of these a couple of weeks ago and I noticed all the women were talking about being called Nazis in their respective countries. And I think it was France, Brazil, and maybe there was an American. So yeah, obviously this is something that they're doing to us globally. So I think it's really important that every time it happens, we don't just ignore it and that we complain to whoever we can complain to. You use whatever low cost, cheap to free quasi-judicial process is available to you. You know, require government to do its job. Know that women's reputations need defending and they're important. And then I guess also just to be aware that it's the women who use their real names in these processes that kind of incur the most damage. So just trying to find a way to kind of share that around, if you can, is, I think, you know, important. So I've got some references, which I should probably try and put in the thingo, in the chat. But yeah, there's quite a lot about our event in April this year and how that kind of changed the story in Melbourne around women's sex-based rights. So yeah, I will leave it there and see if you have any questions.